and some still perfect from his old days in the East. His skin was clear and, in a poor light, young. His colleagues at the bar called him Filth, but not out of irony. It was because he was considered to be the source of the old joke, "Failed in London, try Hong Kong." It was said that he had fled the London bar very young, very poor, on a sudden whim just after the war, and had done magnificently well in Hong Kong from the start. Being a modest man, they said, he had called himself a parvenu, a fraud, a carefree spirit. Filth, in fact, was no great maker of jokes, was not at all modest about his work, and seldom, except in great extremity, went in for whims. He was loved, however, admired, laughed at, kindly, and still much discussed many years after retirement. Now, nearing 80, he lived alone in Dorset. His wife, Betty, was dead, but he often prattled on to her around the house. Astonishingly, in one so old, his curly hair was not yet grey. His eyes and mind alert, he was a delightful man. He had always been thought so. A man whose distinguished life had run steadily and happily. There was no smell of old age about his house. He was rich, and took for granted that it and he would be kept clean, fed, and laundered by servants as it had always been. He knew how to treat servants, and they stayed for years. Betty had been successful with servants too. Both she and old Filth had been born in what Americans called the Orient, and the British Raj had called the Far East. They knew who they were, but they were unself-conscious and popular. After Betty's death, the self-mockery dwindled in old Filth. His life exploded. He became more ponderous. He began, at first slowly, to flick open shutters on the past that he had, as a sensible man with sensible and learned friends, he was a QC and had been a judge, kept clamped down. His success as an advocate in Hong Kong had been phenomenal, for he had had ease, grasp, diligence, and flair. His career had taken off the minute he had begun to be briefed by the Straits Chinese. It was not just that scraps of Eastern languages began to re-emerge from his childhood in Malaya, but a feeling of nearness to the Oriental mind. When old Filth spoke Malay, or less ably Mandarin, you heard an unsuspected voice. Chinese, Malay, and Bengali lawyers, though often trained at Oxford and the Inns of Court, were thought to be not straightforward, but Filth, now old Filth, and after his retirement often dear old Filth, had found them perfectly straightforward and to his taste. All his life he kept a regard for Chinese values. The courtesy, the sudden thrust, the holiness of hospitality, the pleasure in money, the decorum, the importance of food, the discretion, the cleverness. He had married a Scotswoman, but she had been born in Peking. She was dumpy and tweedy, with broad Lanarkshire shoulders and square hands, but she spoke Mandarin perfectly, and was much more at home with Chinese ways and idiom than she ever felt on her very rare visits to Scotland. Her passion for jewellery was Chinese, and her strong Scottish fingers rattled the trays of jade in the street markets of Kowloon, stirring the stones like pebbles on a beach. "When you do that," old Filth would say, when they were young and he was still aware of her all the time, "your eyes are almond-shaped." "Poor old Betty," he would say to her ghost across in another armchair in the house in Dorset, to which they had retired and in which he had died. And why ever Dorset? Nobody knew. Some family tradition somewhere, perhaps. Filth said it was because he disliked everywhere else in England, Betty because she felt the cold in Scotland. They both had a dismissive attitude towards Wales. But if any old pair had been born to become retired expats in Hong Kong, members of the cricket club, the jockey club, stalwarts of the English lending library, props of St. Andrew's Church and St. John's Cathedral, they were Filth and Betty. People who would always be able to keep servants. Filth was very rich, who would live in a house on the Peak, be forever welcoming hosts to every friend of a friend's friend visiting the colony. When you thought of Betty, you saw her at